Welcome to Weasel Gaming, and today we're going to be looking at the tactics for the Vivid Voltage Sword and Shield Charizard theme deck. We'll go ahead and we'll jump right into it, and we're going to start off with looking at the starter Pokemon. Do keep in mind that this is a fire-based deck. It only has fire energy. It does have 18 fire energy. But that doesn't mean all the Pokemon in here are fire Pokemon. This actually has a pretty wide variety. So for our starters, there's two potential starters, and those are Sudowoodo and Charmander. These are both good starters because they have some draws. Sudowoodo has a 1 energy double draw for drawing 2 cards. Charmander has a 1 energy collect, which allows you to draw a card also. Sudowoodo is a little bit better of a starter because the double draw, the flail attack is a little more impressive, and Charmander is the base of your main attacker. So it's kind of better to keep Charmander off the active spot early, just so that you don't end up losing him and losing your ability to get your Charizard out there. For defense, we really only have one, and that's Slugma. And this is a bit of a stretch because it's not really actual defense. The Yawn ability there, the Yawn attack, 1 energy Yawn. Your opponent's active Pokemon is now asleep. No damage attached to that. It's only asleep. That gives you a 50-50 chance to keep him asleep on your opponent's turn. And of course, every time the active player changes, that's another chance for them to wake up. Rarely is that going to last very long. You only have a 50-50 chance for the first turn. It is a really good delay tactic, though. So if you're in a situation where you need to buy some time to prepare something, Slugma can work. So I tend to keep a Slugma or 2 on the bench just in case I need to use that. Next up, we're going to talk about power. So this deck has a lot of power players. They're not huge hitters, but it is where your damage is going to come from. First up is our Lugia. 130 health. We have a 1 energy gust for 30 damage, which isn't bad early on. If you have to use Lugia as a starter, that's not bad. 1 energy, you start doing 30 damage, you have a lot of health to last. If they don't pull anything great right from the start, you can get up to that energy loop and really start hitting them early. So an okay starter if you really need to. The 3 energy loop does 120 damage, which is pretty nice. But you do have to put an energy attached to this Pokemon into your hand. So you're not losing it, you're not discarding it. It's kind of nice because then if Lugia gets knocked out, you don't lose that 1 energy. But it does mean that you're going to be in this weird cycle where you're always having to put that energy back on just to do the attack. Next up in our damage dealers, we're going to bring Slugma back out here, not because Slugma does a lot of damage, but because Slugma evolves into Magcargo. Magcargo has a 3 energy heat blast for 60 damage, which is not a good damage to energy cost by any means. But the 4 energy bright flame does 180 damage. That is almost good enough to knock out anything in theme play. There's only 1 or 2 things that's going to get past that. And one of them, for instance, Rillaboom, is going to take double damage anyways. So really, that's a pretty effective knockout to anything that's out there. The problem is you do have to discard 2 energy when you use that. Discarding energy is always kind of a bummer because you need energy to keep things moving. However, this deck has some ways to recover energy and is pretty energy efficient. So if you need to use Bright Flame a little bit, you can. Now on any ability where you can discard energy, you can always overload that Pokemon by putting 5 or 6 energy on Magcargo, and then you keep them in play longer. However, this isn't a Pokemon I like to do that on very much because he's only got 130 health, which means there are a lot of things out there that can actually knock him out in a single hit, which means it's really risky to overload Magcargo with a lot of energy. if you can look at your opponent's deck, you know his deck well enough, you can see what's on his bench, you know what's capable of doing, then it's something where you could overload, but it's very situational based on what your opponent's playing. Next up, kind of a surprising one here in our fire deck, is a grass type Pokemon. Now, from what I've seen, this guy gets more action for me than a lot of the fire-based Pokemon in this deck. Janma and Janmega. Janma is kind of a weaker one. If you do get it up to 3 energy, 60 damage, again, it's not a very efficient attack for that energy, but it's decent. It does have 80 health, so it can take a hit if it needs to. Janmega, though, is pretty effective. 130 health, can handle things pretty well, except for, again, a fire deck. The U-turn ability for 50 damage is kind of nice. It allows you to, attack with Janmega and then swap in something else. So if you know that Janmega is going to die if you leave Janmega out there, or you know that anything else you put out there is just delay, then you can use Janmega, do that U-turn, at least do some damage, and then swap in that delay Pokemon. And the 4 energy Cutting Wind does 130 damage, which is really nice. A little expensive for that 130 damage, but it's pretty solid, and Janmega tends to be pretty resilient, just because he can leave that front line if needs to with U-turn. And then, of course, the mascot of the deck here, Charmander, Charmeleon, and Charizard. We'll get to Charizard in just a second. Charmander doesn't do great damage, but the 2 energy flare isn't bad. If you're using him as a starter, getting him to 2 energy doesn't even hurt that bad. Charmeleon adds a little bit of health, has a 1 energy slash, which isn't great. The 2 energy Raging Flames does 60 damage, which is pretty nice. But you have to discard the top 3 cards of your deck. Now, usually that kind of card would make me just nope it. Nope, we're not using that. That's not going to be in play. We're skipping that evolution, and we're never going to use that. In this deck, it's okay. I mean, if you're going to use that to do some damage, if you know you're going to follow it up with Charizard and Charmeleon's not going to get knocked out, that's not an okay card to use, because this deck really does revolve around throwing a lot of cards away. So that's kind of okay. And 60 damage for 2 energy isn't bad, especially when you can get that early in the game. Now, of course, our big hitter here is Charizard. 170 health is huge. That's a lot of health. You're going to keep him in the game for a nice long time. We'll come back to Battle Sense here in a second, but we'll talk about the attack right away. 2 energy Royal Blaze does 100 damage, plus you can pull some additional damage. Now, the 100 damage isn't much, but you're only paying 2 energy for it, so it's not bad. It's going to take out a lot of your basics and your stage 1 Pokemon. It's also going to be a major threat to all grass and most metal types. So you're really going to be able to do a lot of damage with this in the right circumstances. Now, the additional damage there, this attack does 50 more damage for each Leon card in your discard pile. This deck has 2 Leon cards. And this is why it's okay to discard stuff left and right, because you actually want these Leon cards in your discard. Now, Leon himself we'll talk about more in depth later. But for each Leon you have in discard, and you have 2 Leons in the deck, you add 50 damage, giving Charizard a total potential damage of 200 damage for 2 energy. That's pretty impressive. Now, going back just a second there to Battle Sense, the ability allows you to, once during your turn, you may look at the top 3 cards of your deck, put one of them into your hand, and discard the other 2. Again, this is something that normally I would really kind of hesitate at, but it's not bad in this case. You're going to pull those 3 cards. You're going to take one of them into your hand. The other 2 go into discard. Now, if you're using Charizard, you don't need much energy, so discarding energy doesn't hurt that bad. If you have a Leon, you can just discard that Leon, and there you go. You got bonus damage. And it allows you to then pick something. Out of those 3 cards, you get to pick something that you do really want to use. Leon himself adds 30 damage. So if you can play Leon at the same time you're using Charizard, that takes you, instead of 100 damage, that takes you to 150 because Leon will be in discard. Plus Leon gives 30 damage. So that can mean that Charizard can do 180 in a round, or even 230 in a round. But that really takes a perfect combination of the right cards at the right time. So running through your cards to dump Leons into discard is not a bad thing in this case, and is actually kind of part of the goal. So that's it for our Pokemon. Your big heavy hitter is Charizard, but he does take a little work because you do need those Leons to really make it come together. So for types, you have a wide variety of types in this deck. Clearly you have a lot of fire type, but you also have some pretty competent grass. You have one really good colorless, and you have some less than stellar fighting types, but they help out in a pinch. You're going to be weak to water because a lot of your deck is still fire-based, but you're going to be strong to grass and metal. You do have to be a little careful, you know, if you're going up against a fire deck. You want to be careful with your Janma and Janmega because they're going to be weak to that. Of course, Lugia is weak to electric. Sudowoodo is weak to grass. So your weaknesses are kind of all over the place, but so are your strengths. So just keep that in mind. You have a lot of flexibility with this deck when it comes to types. Let's get into our support cards. And as always, we start with our draws. So the first 2 we'll talk about are Hop and Dan. You have 4 Hops in this deck. So that's a lot of draw capability. That'll help cycle that deck, get the cards you need. You have 2 Dans also, which is draw 2 cards and then play rock, paper, scissors for potentially another 2 cards. So some good drawing there. A card I have a hate-love relationship with here is Professor's Research. Most of the time I try to avoid playing this card unless I'm desperate or I have nothing at all of value in my hand. In this deck, things change a little bit. I'm a little more apt to use Professor's Research because, again, you need to get to those certain cards to really make this work. You have to be cycling this deck to get those Leons so that you can get those Leons into discard. So if you end up throwing away some energy, you end up throwing away some mediocre Pokemon like, you know, a Slugma or 2 or Yanmas if you don't need them, it's not the end of the world. This deck, I'm a little more apt to dump cards with Professor's Research if I need to cycle them. As always, Professor's Research is a good desperation move, or if you have nothing of value in your hand, use it. It's a good way to refresh your hand. But in this deck, I'm a little more likely to deploy it, even if I have something halfway valuable in my hand, because you need to be cycling this deck. For pulling Pokemon, we have 2 Great Balls, and we have 2 Sonias. Again, Sonia I like to usually, in most cases, use to pull energy. A lot of the other decks that have Sonia are very energy thirsty. They need a lot of energy to get moving and to work. This deck, however, doesn't. Clearly, you know, your Magcargo needs a lot of energy if you're going to use Bright Flame. And Janmega needs a lot of energy to do its larger attack. But Charizard itself is very energy efficient at only needing 2 energy. So energy is not as big of a deal in this deck as it is in a lot of other decks. So Sonia if you need some basic Pokemons, if you have the evolutions in your hand, definitely use Sonia to get those basics on the board. Don't wait around. Don't use Sonia for energy in those cases unless you're dry on energy too. But most of the time this deck suffers from lack of Pokemon, not lack of energy. You also have Evolution Incense. You have just one of these. Best use of it kind of depends on the situation, but typically you're going to be using it, if you have a Charmander down, you're going to be using it to pull the Charmeleon or the Charizard, whichever one you need. Sometimes it can be used to pull Janmega out and get his damage on the board, especially if you're going against a water deck. Otherwise, those are your two big ones, Charizard, Janmega. You know, if you have Charizard in your hand and you're playing Charmander, then use it to get Charmeleon so you can get that bridge there. You also have two Ordinary Rods. Ordinary Rods are a little more important in this deck than they are in some other decks. You're going to use this to pull energy back from your discard pile. So again, if you throw away energy due to Charmeleon, or you're throwing it away due to Charizard, that's okay. Because you can pull that energy back. Same thing with Magcargo. If you're burning energy through him, Ordinary Rod can get that back into your deck so you still have energy in the future. But Ordinary Rod can also be used to pull important Pokemon back out of your discard. And again, that depends on what you're facing, but a lot of times it's going to be Janmega or Charizard, Charmeleon, Charmander, somewhere in that line, depending on what you have in your hand. But Ordinary Rod is a very useful part of this deck. For energy manipulation, we have Bead, who allows you to attach a energy from your hand to one of your benched Pokemon. Helps get those Pokemon up to fighting power. You again have Sonia, which we talked about. We have two Sonias, two Beads. Sonia allows you to pull two energy out of your deck, but a lot of times I'm going to be using Sonia to get your basic Pokemon in this. You also, of course, as we just talked about, have the Ordinary Rod, which allows you to recover energy from your discard. For your other cards, you do have your switch. You have two switches. There's no special function to switch in this one. Just your standard tactical. Maybe you need to save someone, keep a heavy attacker on your bench instead of losing him to the next attack, things like that. You also have two Leons. Now, we already talked about Leon. You want to, one way or another, get Leon into your discard pile. The challenge is deciding when it's best to do that. Leon does give you a bonus damage. Now again, if you use that with Charizard's attack, you can kind of boost Charizard's damage up a little bit, which is nice. Don't hesitate to use it at other times if it's going to knock out an important Pokemon. I've seen Leon used to great effect to knock out someone's first Pokemon and win a game that way because they don't have anything else on the bench. I've seen Leon used with attacks that weren't a threat that suddenly became a threat because of Leon. So make sure you use Leon when it's, most advantageous for you so that you can get him into the discard pile. Don't waste him though. Use him when it's going to pay off. For manipulation, you don't really have any cards for manipulation or control, but you do have Slugma. Slugma's Yawn ability is pretty important. I do recommend using it if you need to. If you have a couple Slugmas on your deck, they're a cheap way to lock down the opponent's Pokemon for a turn or two. So with that, that's all of our various cards in the deck. It's time to look at our stats. For this deck, the power's a 3. There is some higher damage and higher damage possibilities here. Magcargo can throw out a 180, but he's got pretty low health, and you got to discard energy to do that. So there's limited amount of use there for Magcargo. Charizard can do 200, even 230 damage, but all the cards have to kind of fall in your favor for that to happen. Otherwise, Charizard might only be doing 100 damage. And you got to be careful with Charizard's ability when you're looking for those Leons to burn, that you don't deck yourself or get in a situation where you're going to deck yourself before you can knock out the opponent's Pokemon. So power is somewhat regulated in this deck. If you have the right cards, it could easily be a higher powered deck. But in general, overall, across the average, it's kind of a power 3. The speed is a 3. And this is how fast you can get up to speed and start hitting hard. And this deck has decent potential to get moving. Janmega can start doing okay damage with 2 energy. Charizard, Charmeleon only needs 2 energy to really start hitting. And you can do some okay damage then. The others need, 3, and Janmega really wants 4. So your speed is a 3. Not too bad, but not like super fast. Your agility is talking about how well you can get Pokemon on the bench, evolved and ready to go. In this case, agility is a 3. There aren't a lot of super strong Pokemon here. The ones you have are pretty easy to get moving. There's a lot of way to pull cards, to pull Pokemon, to get things back from discard. So it is a 3. It does okay at dealing with getting Pokemon on the bench. Efficiency is how well it can handle energy and lost cards. And this is a pretty efficient deck, except for the fact that it throws a lot of cards away. So it doesn't need a lot of energy to get rolling and to start doing damage, but you're going to throw a lot of energy away over the game. You're going to recover some of that, hopefully. So it's kind of a mixed bag, and that's why our efficiency falls down at a 3. Complexity of this deck is actually one of the more complex decks. It's still only a 3. It's not super complex, but it is a complex deck because you are going to be throwing a lot of cards away. And so you have to watch your deck size to make sure that you're not going to run out of cards. You have to be carefully choosing when you're going to use that ability. You need to time when to use your ordinary rod so that you're not further burying Leons, but you're keeping enough cards in your deck that you're still functional. So there is a lot of timing that has to happen in this deck. There is a bit of complexity to when to play stuff, how to play stuff. Resiliency in this deck is a 3. You don't have a whole lot of defense. Slugma can slow things down with the Yawn ability. But Magcargo and Janmega both have 130 health, as does Lugia. Your Charizard has 170 health, which is kind of nice. So there's a fair bit of survivability here, especially with Janmega's U-turn and whatnot. Your type ability is a 4. You have a wide variety of Pokemon. You got fire, you got grass, you got colorless, you got fighting. So you can adapt to a lot of different situations, and you can avoid a lot of type advantages also. So you have a lot of flexibility here. So that does push the type ability up to a 4, which is kind of nice. For manipulation, all you have is Slugma's sleep. Other than that, you don't have anything else to really help you out there. So kind of an all-around average deck. With the right cards, pulled at the right time, this deck can absolutely crush people. It also looks more intimidating than it really is. It can look like you are just going to be able to do a ton of damage when you really might not be able to. So a lot of times you can scare opponents with this deck too. All in all, it's got the potential to be a great deck, but it's so reliant on cards that kind of holds it back. So it's an average to above average deck. It's certainly competent. It'll certainly stay in there and stay competent for a while. However, as far as fire decks go, it's not the best out there. I still think Relentless Flame is a better fire-based deck. Doesn't mean this is bad. I like this better than Cinderace for sure, but I think Relentless Flame is a better fire deck. This deck is just too reliant on the cards, and has too many kind of weak spots there. So, you know, it is what it is. Not bad, not great. Hopefully you've learned a little bit more about this deck, how to play it, its strengths and weaknesses. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.